Zac is a guitarist for progressive Gold Coast band Opus Of A Machine, whose album Stray Fire is out now. They'll be playing at Progfest in Melbourne on the 26th of January, Sydney on the 27th, Brisbane on the 28th, and supporting Monument in Adelaide on the 29th, and in Perth on the 30th. Zac, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for it. Thanks, man.
Yeah, you're really welcome. Let's go back to the beginning a bit. Band started about 5 years ago. Talk a little bit about how it came together.
Basically, it started between me and the singer Mitch. So we go way back. We went to school together. We have basically been playing music together ever since we picked up our instruments and started playing for the first time. So we've had a few kind of been in and out of each other's lives for a long time, and around the time when he was moving up to Brisbane, I was doing the same. And so we basically just started writing music together, and there's a lot of stuff that came out of that for our first album, and it just kind of snowballed from there. The rest of the guys I met in university, and that was pretty much the rest is history. We ended up doing our first album, Simulacra, 4 or 5 years ago. Took a little bit of a break because commitments that I had with the other band that I was in, Caligula's Horse, and then when I left Caligula's Horse, we pretty much just came straight back into it full time, wrote Stray Fire, and here we are. Now, the name, where did that come from? It's a tricky one. The name Opus Of A Machine, it sort of came to me one day. I like to think a lot about it. I'm a big sci-fi fan, and I'm a big sort of fan of, kind of like imagining sort of different worlds and all of that stuff. And I came up with the name. I believe I found it on a YouTube comment for some other guitarist. I can't really remember right now, but it was essentially a YouTube comment that was critiquing the player's playing style, saying that he sounds, is completely emotionless. He sounds like the Opus Of A Machine. and I as soon as I saw that, I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, that guy kind of just accidentally thought of something really awesome. And I took the name and I just thought it's a really kind of like cool little phrase. It seems like a really kind of juxtaposed thing of like, what would a machine create if it was able to create the world's greatest art? So it was just a phrase that really kind of stuck with me for a long time, and I didn't really think it would end up being a band name, but here we are. Kind of just stuck.
Probably kind of an obvious thing in that it's, I would imagine it's kind of the music you're into, but like, why these kind of broad style of kind of progressive metal, progressive rock, post-rock mixed in together? Why has that kind of attracted you and made you want to make this kind of music?
I think there was kind of a watershed moment for me when reforming the band after I had a big sort of period of hiatus, and that was because leaving a band like Caligula's Horse, where I had a bit of writing involvement with that, but a large amount of it was solely in the realm of Sam and Jim, the guitarist and singer. And I never really wanted to mess with that personally. I felt they had a really, really great energy and a really, really a good writing process. When I left the band and I knew that I wanted to kind of pick Opus Of A Machine up full time, my only kind of thought process is I don't really want to kind of create a band in a specific genre. I don't really ever want to kind of do something that I don't really want to do something that will fit into a particular style. So I kind of just started writing music that I like, songs that I like, sort of sections that I like, and it kind of just came together in that way. It's really just there's really not really kind of too much deeper meaning to that. It's really just I love the styles that I experiment with in the band, and so I kind of just roll with that. There's never really a sort of a big consideration of you know what kind of musical identity we'll have. It's always usually been write what I want and play what I want, and if it comes out as a good song, it's a good song to me. Yeah.
Now, from what I gather from you talking, obviously sort of reviewing the credits of the album, it's the main sort of musical drive behind the album is you and Mitchell. Like, let's take it back a bit.
Yes.
So,
yes, correct.
So, you guys, how do you like? Not everyone jams. Like, not everyone's style gels when they're writing. How do you guys kind of gel? What is it that enables you to work together in that way?
Well, I mean, as I said, we kind of grew up together. Mitchell and I went through high school together, and so a lot of these kind of pivotal albums that you have when you're a teenager, and a lot of these things, everybody has them. Everybody looks back on their teen years and thinks they have that one album or those few albums that really changed you as a person and kind of defines who you are musically later in your life. Mitchell and I really shared that. We both had we were both there together, sort of listening to these albums together. So I'd say naturally our interests kind of aligned in that way. We both have we both had that kind of a bit of a start in metal and nu metal as most teenagers did back in the early 2000s. And it kind of moved a little bit more into sort of progressive territory, and we kind of got into progressively more different music, and so that kind of defined where we wanted to take a musical project if we were to ever start one ourselves. So it really was. We do butt heads a lot, but I feel as though Mitchell and I can be probably the most honest. Out of any sort of friendship that I have, especially when we're in the writing room, we can be really, really objective with each other, and that simply just comes down to the fact that we've spent so many years together. We're like an old married couple.
So you talked a little bit earlier about the fact that part of what has sort of driven this album is kind of letting go of some of your ideas about like what the music is and sort of settling for the music that you kind of really want to hear. Is there anything else that kind of, separates this one from its predecessor?
Strayfire was certainly a conscious effort to do something different. We started doing when we started writing this. I naturally kind of just I had a large period of time where I was kind of off heavy music. I was listening to a lot of very different stuff. I was listening to a lot of Radiohead, a lot of hip hop, a lot of electronic music at the time, and obviously there's a lot of it's a very guitar driven music. I write music almost solely from the guitar, so there's always going to be that old element of metal come through. But with Strayfire, it was like I wanted to return after such a long time and not do something that was really just kind of carbon copy of what I knew in the past. And I certainly didn't want it to be anything that was similar to anything else I was known for, So this was kind of like a conscious effort to really create something that, there's heavy parts in there, and there's also sort of soft and electronic parts in there. It's really kind of like a conscious effort to try and create something that was sort of stands out above other bands in our genre, and really kind of create something that isn't typically what you would hear in the genre of progressive metal or progressive rock. So it was really just sort of a motivation behind wanting to kind of be my best self, really, and write the best music that I possibly can, regardless of what genre it's at in.
In terms of like you, so let's say this sort of like hypothetical scenario. You've got some time in the afternoon or whenever, and you're like, yep, I'm going to start writing a particular song for the next album. What does that process look like for you? Do you have any kind of, I don't know, moods, environments, processes that like really motivate you and get your creativity going?
It's funny because like probably for the last 5-6 years, I've been in very different situations in my life. As you do in your sort of your early 20s, while you're studying or while you're sort of working some dead end jobs or anything like that, I'm constantly moving around. I'm constantly being in different spaces and different scenarios. So I've never really had like a long period of time where this is the place I write music. This is this location that I get to write my music. So. I've often thought about that question myself quite a lot, and I think I've never really had kind of like a formula of sitting down and writing something for the next album. Obviously, when I sit down, it's always going to be from the realm of I'm writing this for Opus Of A Machine, or I'm writing this for a particular purpose. But right now, how we write right now is really because it's really in a unique position because we're kind of finding all of these old ideas that didn't make it onto Stray Fire or Simulacra, or didn't really kind of evolve into the songs into songs that would eventually make it onto an album. So we have this huge kind of catalog of riffs and ideas, and a huge amount of them, and a very, very diverse range of these ideas. So this is kind of like for the first time probably in my life that I've actually kind of get to pick and choose where I want to go creatively, out of real ideas that exist. Back in the day, it was really just, I'd be doing whatever I'd be doing throughout the day, and there'd be an idea that strikes me, and I couldn't do anything besides go into my studio and get this thing down. It kind of plagued me forever. Whereas now it's a bit more methodical. I mean, Mitchell and I, we meet once a week. We sit down in our little studio, and we just listen to ideas, and 50% of the time that turns into something really, really productive, and we create something really, really awesome. And the other times we just sit back and we listen and we talk about ideas and talk about sort of conceptual ideas or little riffs or styles that we want to do. So it's really new territory right now when I'm writing. In the early days, it was always really kind of just like I needed to have I had inspiration for something. The classic. You've got this one riff in your head and you just need to get it down. Whereas it's a bit more kind of streamlined and a bit more sort of processed in a very healthy way nowadays.
Now, we've sort of been talking about you and Mitchell, but one particular song on the album, Rudi's song, was written by yourself and the drummer, Trevor. Talk a little bit about how that song came about.
Oh, I actually wrote that song. That was one of the few songs that I ever wrote that I never intended to have it be part of Opus Of A Machine, actually. And you can probably hear that. It's very, very different. It's an instrumental track, which we've never really done. And my whole approach to that was, well, a bit of the backstory. Rudi is my godson, my fiance and I's godson. We have really, really good friends who ended up having a little boy about a year ago, or a year and a bit ago, and they asked to create something, or to create a gift for him, so when he grows up he can listen to it. And they didn't want us to just sort of buy something. So I wrote him a song, and in one night I kind of just sat down, played around with some stuff, and the main melody of that sort of came out of that writing session. It was effectively the entire sort of bare bones of the song. came out in this one little writing session that I had on my own, and realizing that I kind of got that in my head quite a bit. I really, really liked it and started developing the idea. And it was actually one of the few songs I kind of went to the rehearsal space with the rest of the band and said, let's just play around with this. And Trevor was immediately attached to that song. He was very attached to it. So he kind of jumped into it and started having all these structural ideas and all of these other little things. And by the end of it, it was kind of turned into something that was certainly not like what it was before. And it was definitely because of the input that Trevor had on that. So I couldn't, I couldn't not have him as a writer. It was he really kind of made that song his own. And there's a lot of kind of emotion and feel that's in that drum performance that I think isn't quite captured in some of the other songs. So he certainly kind of deserved that songwriting credit. That was one of the kind of the more unique experiences we had with songs where we would, typically it's always been Mitchell and I in the studio and we're writing kind of from a production perspective. We sit down here with Pro Tools and we get some layers down and we kind of think about it from that perspective, where that was sort of the first song I kind of brought to the rest of the band. And I love it. It's a really different song. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I think it's one of my favorite songs I've ever written.
In terms of, moving from instrumental to lyrical, in terms of the lyrical content of the album, how does that come about between you and Mitchell?
Oh, the first album, it was about 50-50. I think it was probably more me than him for lyrics. But Stray Fire, basically music and lyrics are effectively 50-50 with Mitchell and I now. The lyrics in particular were probably about maybe 70% him, 30% me. So there was a few lines that I wrote within the album. But I really wanted to kind of let Mitchell sort of, make that his baby and make that, the thing that he was sort of known for in that album. I mean, obviously he's the singer writing melodies and writing lyrics. He knows his voice better than anybody. So I just figured from a practical standpoint, he's better off writing that stuff because he knows how to create the best performance he can. With the lyrics, it's a shared effort in terms of conceptual ideas, definitely. Mitchell will usually come to us or me with like a really great idea for a singular concept or a song or something like that. I have a tendency, whether it be a fault of mine or a skill that I have, but I have a tendency to overthink a lot of lyrics and a lot of songs in my own music and sort of start thinking about these kind of grand narratives and grand concepts that I'm able to kind of introduce to the lyrics to try and kind of give it some sort of cohesion across an album. I've never really said that Stray Fire is a concept album lyrically. It's not. I still wouldn't consider it that, but there is a stylistic cohesion around the lyrics and around what we wanted to kind of achieve with that. Stray Fire is a lot more personal than Simulacra. It's really something that I think Mitchell really tapped into a personal side with a lot of the themes on that album. I did as well. We went through a lot of two sort of very different periods in our life during when Opus was on hiatus. So we had a lot to kind of say and a lot to sort of express through that album. And as a result, it is a very personal album, and it's a very kind of singular, kind of emotional album. It's there's not a lot of stuff on there that has a lot of social commentary to it. It's really, really personal. Yeah.
In terms of the title of the album, Stray Fire, was that something you had in mind prior, or was it a choice of relating it to one of the tracks? How did the title come about?
I actually thought of the title of the album, I believe, before the song. I'm really, my memory's really bad on this because because it was all kind of came together very, very quickly. But I think I thought of the phrase "We are all Stray Fire," and I don't know where that kind of came from. I think it was more kind of like, I don't know. It's probably pointless dwelling on that, but I thought of this phrase, and that was much like the name of the band. It just kind of stuck with me for a few days. I couldn't really kind of get it out of my head. I loved the two words "Stray Fire." I think it sort of phonetically sounds really, really good, and I really like the link between this Stray Fire. The album is a large in part about personal growth and realizing sort of who you are and what you consider home and letting that define who you are. And I feel as though how that kind of relates to the title Stray Fire is that I sort of had the idea of the metaphor of the fact that we are all stray fire. We all kind of get caught up and feed on what's around us and create the world around us in a sense by also destroying it. And I think that kind of, I don't know, there was something sort of unexplainable about it. It's sort of the album title kind of just stuck with me. It's a very kind of catchy title, I think, and I couldn't kind of leave it alone as soon as I had that in my head.
In terms of the artwork, who did you get to do that, and what was their brief?
I tracked down a guy because I actually spent a lot of time looking for artists online, and I knew that I wanted to kind of I have a network of a few artists that are incredible in Brisbane and around Australia, but I wanted to kind of specifically find somebody new to work with. I wanted to find somebody who had a completely different style to mine, and my original intention is to look for an artist that never actually had too much experience in progressive rock or progressive metal. I feel as though there's a specific style that I'm noticing in a lot of progressive metal nowadays, where it's got to be dark, or it's got to be really kind of moody, or really sort of like it's got to be a particular way. I found it's a guy called Aaron Powers. He's got a website called www.newantlers.com. He's a fantastic artist. As soon as I found him, I was absolutely blown away, which is obviously why I contacted him. He's a guy from the United States, and I found him on, I believe, Pinterest. Don't ask me why I was on Pinterest. I think it was for the express purpose of looking for an artist. But I found him on Pinterest. I sent him a message, tracked down his website, sent him a message, and said, "Look, man, I love your art. I don't know whether you're doing any commission work right now, but I've got this album. I think it would work perfectly." As far as the brief is concerned, I didn't really give him too much of a brief. My approach to sort of giving artists briefs on album covers or shirt designs or anything like that is, they're artists, they're creative people, just like musicians. And then, I feel as though if I were to be told what to create for someone else, I wouldn't really want too much specific direction. I'd kind of want to just know what the thing I'm creating it for, and let myself sort of do my own thing. And that's exactly what I did with Aaron. I basically just said, look, here's where we're going with the album. Here's the lyrical themes. Here's what they sound like. At that point, most of it was in demo form. I sent him a lot of the demos and just said, look, we're a progressive rock band, we're a progressive metal band, but this album is actually fairly different. It's softer, it's really melodic, it's got a lot of post-rock stuff elements in it. So listen to it, see what you think. And he we were talking back and forth for a little bit, and a few months later he came out with basically a whole bunch of probably about 6 or 7 designs, that all of which I believe he sort of come back and said, here's a few ideas that I'm working on. And all of those designs actually made it into the album artwork. So I don't know whether you've got the album in front of you, but the album cover, all of the artwork in the middle, and in the booklet, the image on the back, the image in the, as you sort of open it up, everything sort of came out of that one particular first idea share. Like here's a few things that I'm working on, and I loved every single one of them. I showed the artwork to the rest of the band, and everybody loved all of it. So we were like, yeah, that's fantastic. So after some tweaking, it was good to go. I wanted to have something that was uniquely his style, and if you go onto his website, you'll definitely understand his style. He does all of this sort of beautiful, sort of really soft-colored, ornate stuff that some of it's, a lot of it's oil and wood, all of those beautiful things. He does a few commission works of gig posters and other stuff like that. They're fantastic. He sells prints. They're fantastic. If anybody is listening to this and is looking to buy some art, definitely support him. He's fantastic.
You performed the entire album, Straight Fire, last year. Talk a little bit about that experience, what that was like.
That was the whole idea of playing an album from start to finish live is something that I've been basically wanting to do since I was a teenager, and I'd never got to do it. And it was something that a huge inspiration is we ended up touring with my old band Caligula's Horse earlier in the year. and they ended up performing their new album In Contact live in its entirety, and that was something that absolutely blew me away, because I knew it's a bit of a trend nowadays. A lot of big bands are doing that, but I'd never actually been to a show where I'd seen a band that had done that, and typically it sort of goes against how I would really perform an album, because typically there's a lot of songs and a lot of things that I like to put on albums that are kind of difficult to play live, especially with Straight Fire. There's a lot of sort of electronic instruments and things like that was going on that I kind of worried that we may never be able to play this stuff live. And when the idea came up of we really wanted to do a special show there, and that when the idea came up of playing the entire album, I sort of thought about the logistics of it and realized that let's do it. Let's just figure it out and do it. And it was amazing. We had a continuous backing track because we play with a click and backing track live. Trevor, our drummer, has a feed of a click track in his ears, and then the rest of the backing track. So a lot of sort of synthesizers and keyboards and things that you couldn't quite play live, especially in a 4-piece, goes out to the backing track, and then we play the rest of the instruments with it. So we had basically one whole backing track for the entire album. Trevor basically press played, and we all just kind of went with it with the entire album. And it was fantastic. It was one of the most comfortable experiences I've probably ever had on stage. Really, really fun. I was a little worried about how people would kind of how some of the more kind of weirder songs would be received, like Rudi's song or Wild Unknown, but the crowd absolutely loved it. It was a huge pleasure to play, and I'd actually really love to do it again sometime. When we're not playing half-hour sets and smaller sets, I'd love to, next time we do a bit of a headline show or a headline tour, I'd love to attempt that again, because it was a huge thrill to be able to kind of show people sort of the entire album, how we designed it,
You also supported, I think it was Tesseract last year. Talk a little bit about that experience as well.
That was great. I knew a bit of the Tesseract guys from a few years ago. When I was in Caligula's Horse, we actually ended up touring through Australia with them, and to find out that I got to play with them again with Opus, that was an awesome experience. I've been listening to Tesseract since their first album. I think they're a great band. Their newest album in particular, Sonder, is just fantastic. I think that's probably one of the best albums I heard last year. And it was just a huge pleasure to kind of to meet the whole band, and we had a bit of time hanging out afterwards. I know those guys work so hard, and I know because I've toured with them. They're when they're on tour, they're on the ball, and they're focused on their work. But thankfully, Brisbane was the last show on their tour, so we actually got to have a chance to kind of hang out with them and catch up. It was great, and to watch them side of stage was just phenomenal. But the show was fantastic for us. We had it's always a bit of a question mark when you're opening a show whether people sort of come out early, but majority of the venue was packed out. It was quite a sort of humbling experience to kind of walk out on stage and see all those people so early, So it was fantastic. It was a great night.
Talking more broadly about playing live, what is it you're trying to do when you're playing a show?
It's a tricky one. I think there's a distinct lack of positivity when it comes to bands playing live. I feel that, which is never really a bad thing. There's many amazing bands out there that have this really kind of moody, sort of dark edge. I've always liked to make playing live a bit more sort of personal and a bit more kind of interactive with the audience. So we've always kind of, we've always had a lot of fun. I want people to kind of see us live and see us just having a ball on stage, and hopefully actually being able to kind of have a ball with us. It's really all about just sort of unabashed positivity. It's about going to get out on stage and just having a lot of fun, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're seeing Tool or whether you're seeing Steel Panther. It's a fun time. It's a fun time seeing any live music, and I've kind of just sort of candidly sort of fallen into that when I play live. I just have a good time, and I find it hard to.
Like, when did you start listening to progressive music, and what was it that caught your attention?
It's actually convenient that I mentioned Tool, because Tool, pretty much Tool. I discovered them when I was about 14 or 15. That was kind of my first band that was ever kind of like, they did all these long songs and these sort of cerebral kind of weird passages and all these bizarre interludes, and sort of like a level of aggression that you could never really get with just sort of standard metal. And that was kind of like opened the door to a lot of music that I love today. I still love Tool. I will always love Tool. There'll always be a special place in my heart for that band. But from there, when I was really getting into guitar, I kind of got into that kind of shred world a bit, and I was mad on Dream Theater and a lot of those other kind of more sort of shreddy, technical, progressive bands. Nowadays, I feel as though there's no huge amount of metal that I listen to, but the metal that I do listen to is I feel as though it needs to have some sort of special kind of edge to it, or special kind of uniqueness to it. I'm very, very picky with the music that I listen to now, but I think it was early when I first discovered progressive music. And especially progressive metal, it was probably around 14, 15 when I really, really got into it. But actually being able to kind of write that music and always sort of having that idea of this is what I want to do was only sort of in my sort of late teen years, sort of maybe 18, 19, when I left school, where I realized I want to do something really unique, and whether it be technical, whether it be kind of sort of more emotional, sort of progressive rock, it needs to be something that's really, really different and really unique.
I think you might have hinted the answer to this one just there, but when did you start playing guitar, and why did you stick with it?
I started playing guitar at about 12 years old. I think it was probably around maybe 12 and a half. At the time, my parents were very hesitant to get me into guitar. They didn't want to buy me a guitar because they brought me to piano lessons when I was probably about 7, 8 years old. And this is actually a pretty funny story. And so I started learning piano when I was, around 7, 8 years old, and getting lessons with this, because I originally came from a Catholic school when I was very young, and I was getting lessons from this, who I thought for a very long time was just this sweet old lady who was a nun that was, knew how to play all the hymns and everything like that. And when I got into the room and I was playing with her, she was just nasty. It was like, and I didn't want to practice. I didn't want to do anything. So I was like, and I remember her saying to, I just kind of gave up and, didn't want any bar of that. And I remember saying to her after basically quitting lessons, I remember her going to me, "Oh, Zach, so you don't want to be a musician?" I remember looking her in the eye and saying, "No, definitely not. I don't want to be a musician." And a couple of years later, I started to get into a bit more sort of rock music and metal. And again, it was I don't know, with guitar, it was like, I don't know whether when you were growing up, you always kind of had these sort of images in your head of like, imagine if you were a rock star, or imagine if you were, if you were on stage playing to all these people, what instrument would you be playing? And it was always guitar for me. I don't know why, but guitar was always just that one instrument that I feel like if I ever picked up an instrument, it would be guitar. And I eventually did. Had a small amount of lessons, but after maybe 10 lessons, I was effectively self-taught at that point. and just started learning song after song after song. Even from an early age, I was writing music as well. So it was about 12 years old, and I've just been playing ever since, really.
What have you been listening to, watching, or reading recently?
Oh man, that's a tricky one. The last 4 weeks, I haven't really been listening to music. I've kind of been enjoying being on holiday away from music. I've been rewatching House of Cards. I've already watched all of that, but picking that up again, which I think is a really fantastic series. I've been keen to get into the new Black Mirror. I don't know if you've ever heard of the series Black Mirror, but that's really fantastic. There's a new season out. That's kind of this weird interactive thing, but I haven't seen it yet, and I've been avoiding spoilers constantly. But for music, it's really just kind of like I've just been picking up some old stuff. I did get into a band called Marabou State. I'm not sure if they're Australian or not, but they're kind of like I don't really want to say world music, but they're mostly electronic, kind of that sort of downbeat, groovy sort of electronic thing, very similar to artists like Bonobo. Their newest album, Kingdom in Color, is fantastic. I kind of love that from the start. Once again, I find myself constantly going back to Sonder by Tesseract. I mentioned earlier. That's an album that, you know, I'll have these. When it first came out, I had this, I was obsessed with it for months. I couldn't put it down. Then I kind of stopped listening to it, as you do with most music, and then it just kind of keeps creeping in. It's an album that I can just listen to over and over again. But that's probably the two big ones: the new Tesseract, Marabou State's fantastic. That's pretty much it, man. I haven't really been consuming anything in the second half of the year. I think I've just sort of taken it easy and sort of tried to kind of nope out of society.
becoming more than just the least differences inside and now, and realizing that our fate will be the same when we're undivided. Borderlines bought and paid for. Becoming more than just these differences inside and now, and realizing that our fate will be the same when we're undivided. Becoming more than just these differences inside and